Is it going? It's going. Hi, I am Miss Sloan, and these are my wonderful honors bio students, and we are reviewing chapter 20 for our quiz over the endocrine system. So here is a list of things to know. So take a quick minute, look through it. Once again, I will try to remove this over to, oh my gosh, it's working, it's working. Hi. So how does your endocrine system work? Differentiate, describe between exocrine and endocrine glands. Characteristics, differentiate between the nervous system and the endocrine system. Positive versus negative controls or negative feedback, contrary hormones, protein versus steroids. You should be able to differentiate between those. How does the hypothalamus regulate the pituitary gland? And remember, there's two parts to the pituitary. Hi, Nikki. The anterior pituitary and the posterior pituitary. Great. And then know the location, like where it would be if I gave a picture and I said, what's this gland? And what hormones it would secrete and the purpose of those hormones. So the anterior, posterior pituitary, thyroid, parathyroid, adrenal cortex, adrenal medulla, ovaries, testes, thymus gland, pineal gland, and then the other was adipose tissue, kidneys, and prostaglandins and tears. Okay. Initially, just looking at that, maybe highlight right now what you're most concerned about to make sure that that gets addressed in our review today. I want to make sure you feel comfortable. Ready? Can I keep going? You good? Okay. We were worried. Where were you? Finally, you're here. Okay. So there's the code right there if you want to get in the code TWWTWD. TWWTWD. All right. So on the endocrine system, it's working with your nervous system in order to maintain what? Homeostasis. Okay. Which one's quicker? Nervous system. Okay. The endocrine system is a little bit slower because your chemicals have to travel a bigger distance. In the nervous system, because we've already started talking about that, yes? Yeah, we have, right? Yeah. So with the nervous system, it's just going that short distance, and it's just a neurotransmitter between those two cells that are really, really close to each other. But in the endocrine system, it's moving from one organ at a distance, and its target could be far away. So how does it impact that target and specifically and not other cells? And that's because the target tissue has what? Receptors for that hormone in order to have that response. So that's the key thing you want to know there about having. How come it worked before? What am I doing differently? Okay. The target cell has receptors. Okay. Exocrine versus endocrine. Exocrine secretes into a duct, like a salivary gland into your mouth, or a sweat gland, right, into some duct. The pancreas, the liver into the bile duct. Okay. Whereas an endocrine gland secretes into your blood. So that's telling you that you have a capillary bed in that particular tissue or organ, and that organ is going to put that chemical signal via the blood, and it can travel elsewhere. When we talked about nervous versus endocrine, we know already, because we started to learn that nerve cells are called neurons. We know that, whereas you're looking at a whole gland usually. We talked about the target for the nervous system is always muscles and glands. Those are your only options. Whereas the endocrine system, it could be cells throughout your entire body. The response is usually very short and quick with the nervous system, whereas the endocrine system, the effects are long lasting, and both of them work through negative feedback. Look at your bio buddy, look into their eyes, say, are you okay right now? Are you good right now? Anything scary? Okay, I'm going to keep going. So positive versus negative feedback. Which one is corrective? Negative, exactly. It's some set point that you're trying to hover around. There's a healthy blood sugar level that you're trying to hover around. There's a healthy temperature that you're trying to hover around. And so sometimes you might need to increase the amount of insulin you have if you're trying to lower your blood sugar. Sometimes you may need to increase glucagon in order to elevate your blood sugar if you haven't had a meal. That is negative feedback because it's corrective. Positive feedback is more gets you more, whereas negative feedback is more stimulus gets you less. More gets you more means more stimulus, you get more feedback, so you get more stimulus, which you gets more feedback. That's rare. It's usually something you need right away, like to get a baby out in birth, or you need to clot your blood, or you're in the middle of your menstrual cycle and you're trying to build up your uterine lining. Yay. So it's going to keep amping it up until you get to that climactic event, whatever that is. There's less of that. There's more of negative feedback where it's corrective in order to maintain homeostasis. All right, and then here's just a little diagram to show that. All right, contrary hormones. Contrary, or just like it sounds. What's another word instead of contrary that we could have used? Oh, and I put it on there already. What's the other word? Antagonistics. Just like triceps and biceps and quads and hamstrings, they're working just to dial it in right where you want to be. So insulin and glucagon can work together. Calcitonin and the parathyroid gland can work together to get your calcium levels just right. So you have positive, negative feedback. You've got contrary hormones. All of that helps keep your body in homeostasis. Now, types of hormones. Am I moving too fast? You okay? Okay. Yes, I'm moving too fast, or yes, you're okay. You're sure. Okay. So the types of hormones you have, most of your hormones are water soluble, or another name for that is protein hormones. That's most of your hormones. Some of your hormones are lipid soluble or steroid hormones. Steroid hormones are obviously going to be in your ovaries and your testes. And then remember, I told you the adrenal gland, the inside, the adrenal medulla, adrenaline, noradrenaline, that's protein. But your adrenal cortex, yeah, that is a lipid hormone. These usually have longer lasting effects, okay, like ovaries, testes, sexual reproduction, and maturation. Remember how the adrenal medulla is fight or that's right now, right? But when we talked about the adrenal cortex, that's long-term response to stress, right? A quiz, if I tell you, oh, we're going to take a pop quiz right now, that's adrenaline. And if you're mad at me, it's also what? Noradrenaline. That's right now, right? The adrenal cortex is the school year or the semester, long-term response to stress. Okay, so these lipid soluble hormones, estrogen, progesterone, testosterone, and then the three categories of hormones from the adrenal cortex. I didn't have you memorize those: glucocorticoids, mineralocorticoids, cortical sex hormones. Those three, all of that are lipid. They go, because they're soluble in the phospholipid bilayer, they can go all the way in. Maybe they bind to a receptor in the cytoplasm and they become a transcription factor to help RNA polymerase binds to the promoter. Perfect. Yes.
I'm just a little confused what the adrenal cortex is.
Oh, okay. You know what? Do you want to put a pin in that? And I have a picture of it, and then I'll go over it with you then. Don't let me not hit it. Okay. All right. Water. All you need to know right now is the adrenal gland sits on top of your kidneys, and the middle of your adrenal gland secretes adrenaline and noradrenaline, and the cortex is on the outside, and it is a lipid soluble hormones. It's hormones. Okay. Water soluble hormones, protein based hormones, they cannot come in because proteins are made out of what? What are proteins made out of? Amino acids. And those R groups on the amino acids could be hydro or hydro. So they interact, right? They're water soluble, right? And so they can't get through the phospholipid bilayer. So they stand at the door and knock, and a second messenger is triggered inside. So it binds to a receptor, which triggers ultimately the production of a second messenger like cyclic AMP. And I showed you a picture of that. Don't stress out about it. But if you want to write down something, cyclic AMP is a second messenger. It's kind of a ubiquitous second messenger. Or it might open up a gate to allow like calcium to come in, and that would be your second messenger. Okay. And then your second messenger in this signal transduction pathway is going to get that effect, whatever it is you want. Okay. This is a little bit slower because you're affecting DNA and the proteins that are made. These are usually a bit faster, something where you need a quick response in order to maintain your homeostasis. Okay, check with your bio buddy, look them in the eye, make sure they're okay. You good? All right. So the most complicated of all of them is this one, right? And that is the hypothalamus and its regulation of the pituitary gland. Why is the pituitary gland so important? What do we call it? It's the master gland. And we call the pituitary gland the master gland because it controls so many other things in our body, right? Water balance, reproduction, milk production, growth, metabolism. So it's really an important gland. Now, because of the way embryonically it developed, the way you control it is quite different. Okay. The hypothalamus is full on nervous tissue. It's part of your brain. Okay. The pituitary gland dangles down from your brain. And the posterior pituitary descended from the hypothalamus, and that's why the hypothalamus has a direct connection to it. And the hypothalamus has what's called neuro, which makes us think of what? Neurons, right? Neurosecretory, which makes us think of glands. Neurosecretory cells that extend from the hypothalamus down into the posterior pituitary. And in fact, the hypothalamus makes the two hormones that the posterior pituitary secretes because it has neurosecretory cells. So it's putting the oxytocin in the posterior pituitary. The hypothalamus with its neurosecretory cells are putting in the ADH in the posterior pituitary. Then it has some secondary neurons which tell it when to secrete it. Secrete now and direct it. It has that direct control because the posterior pituitary descended from the hypothalamus. There's a close connection there. The anterior pituitary grew up and out of your what? Mouth. So it doesn't have the direct connection. It doesn't extend all the way to the hypothalamus. As far as it got was the stalk. So the hypothalamus secretes what kind of hormones? Releasing or stimulating hormones? Releasing, because R comes before S in the alphabet. So these neurosecretory cells go as far as the stalk, and in the capillaries of the stalk, they put in releasing hormone, like thyroid releasing hormone, which then gets carried by those capillaries who break into a second set of capillaries at your anterior pituitary. And that thyroid releasing hormone goes out of the second set of capillaries, goes into the anterior pituitary, and the anterior pituitary says, okay. And the anterior pituitary starts secreting thyroid stimulating hormones. Okay, so that's an indirect connection. So two of the hormones from the anterior pituitary are luteinizing hormone, LH, and follicle stimulating hormone, FSH. I just gave you the abbreviated, but those were your two gonadotropins, which affect your gonads. What are your gonads? Ovaries and testes. The hypothalamus puts gonadotropic releasing hormones into the capillary, right? And then that travels by the blood into the anterior pituitary. Anterior pituitary says, check, got it. And it starts secreting FSH and LH, the two gonadotropic hormones. So it's an indirect connection, but it's still faster because of the unusual of having two capillaries back to back. Okay, go look at your bio buddy now. See if they're doing okay. Who makes the hormones of the posterior pituitary? The hypothalamus does, and stores them there. Who tells the posterior pituitary when to secrete its hormones? Hypothalamus tells it, right? Who makes the hormones of the anterior pituitary? Anterior pituitary. Who tells it when to secrete them? The hypothalamus, by giving it releasing hormones. Then what comes out of the anterior pituitary are stimulating hormones. They're two different hormones, okay? Two different hormones. So the anterior pituitary makes its own hormones, but the hypothalamus tells it when to release those hormones. Using the double capillaries, it speeds up the process instead of having to have the blood go all the way back to the heart, to the lungs, to the heart, and then re-hit the anterior pituitary. Okay, are you all right? Questions you want to ask? Yes.
So the hypothalamus makes hormones to tell the posterior pituitary to release its hormones.
Yes,
Okay.
I like that. So the hypothalamus is making a lot of hormones. I like exactly how he phrased it. The hypothalamus is making hormones. It's making the hormones of the posterior pituitary, and the posterior pituitary is storing it. It's making hormones that boss the anterior pituitary around and tell it to what to release. Good, 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 and good. More questions on that? That was a good, yes, go right ahead.
Can you repeat?
I can totally repeat that, maybe. Okay. The hypothalamus is in the business of making hormones. It makes the posterior pituitaries, it's two hormones. It makes it for them. It makes the oxytocin and it makes the ADH. And it makes those hormones and it gets the posterior pituitary to store it and it tells it when to release it. For the anterior pituitary, all it makes is hormones, but they are releasing hormones that boss the anterior pituitary around and tell the anterior pituitary what it should release. Sends a signal, a hormone signal to the anterior pituitary, and then the anterior pituitary will release whatever it told it to release. But anterior pituitary makes its own hormones. Good? Everybody? All right. That was the hardest part. So then we just look at the different hormones. Oxytocin, ADH. So that's post-PIT. Oxytocin, what are we going to remember for oxytocin? Oxytocin, what is that? We call it the what kind of hormone? Out hormone. I was making an O for oxytocin. I don't know what you thought I was making, but I was making an O, okay? An O for oxytocin. What does it make come out? Now, I'm not going to be able to post this video, right? Baby and milk to feed the baby. That makes so much sense. The baby's coming out, the milk comes out to feed the baby. Boom, boom. But to actually make milk in your mammary glands, that's from the anterior pituitary sending a signal, okay? Both signals are going to the breast tissue, okay? Oxytocin makes the milk come out, but prolactin makes you make the milk, okay? ADH stands for anti-diuretic hormone. I don't want to die. Easiest way to die is to become dehydrated. So ADH makes your kidneys reabsorb more water from your urine so you pee less. Because if I peed more, that would be a diuretic like coffee or 7-Up. And if I pee more, I could become dehydrated. ADH is the opposite of that. Okay. So then into the anterior pituitary. TSH, okay, stands for thyroid stimulating hormone. Why did the anterior pituitary release thyroid stimulating hormone? What message did the hypothalamus send it? Thyroid releasing hormone. Okay, so the thyroid releasing hormone got put into the stalk, into this portal system, carried here, and anterior pituitary says, yes, sir, and puts out the thyroid stimulating hormone. Okay, and we know that that's going to travel by the blood and it's going to tell your what gland? Thyroid gland to secrete more thyroid hormone, and that thyroid hormone is going to provide feedback to both your hypothalamus and your pituitary gland and tell it to stop. What kind of feedback is that? Negative feedback. Perfect. But if your thyroid hormone level drops too low, then your hypothalamus will start yelling at your pituitary. Pituitary starts yelling at the thyroid. Remember the role playing we did in class? What key element do you need in order to make thyroid hormone? Iodine. And if you don't have that, what can you get? Goiter. Yeah, because the thyroid gland is trying to produce hormone and it keeps getting stimulated by the anterior pituitary and it can't do it. Okay. ACTH stands for adrenal corticotropic hormone, adrenal cortex. And so it's going to affect the outer part of the adrenal gland. That's long-term stress. Prolactin, we already did that, makes some milk. GH stands for what? Growth hormone. It's going to help you grow. What needs to help you grow? Your bones and your muscles, right? And FSH and LH, these are your two gonadotropin, so they affect your ovaries and your testes. Okay, questions on that? Look at your bio, buddy. Look at them. See if they're all right. She's not looking at you. I'm interested. I don't know. All right, next. Okay, so we have our thyroid gland here. Sitting on our thyroid gland, these four dots is your parathyroid gland. So your thyroid gland, two categories of hormones. Thyroid hormone is about your, starts with an M, metabolism. This is straight up memory you have to do. I don't know what to tell you on this, straight up memory. Okay, that's your metabolism. Okay, calcitonin, remember how we learned that one? Tone it down now. So calcitonin lowers your blood calcium. Okay, the opposite antagonistic contrary hormone to calcitonin is parathyroid hormone, and it says to elevate. Okay, good. Okay, next, we already talked about this. The hypothalamus secretes thyroid releasing hormone, tells the anterior pituitary secrete thyroid stimulating hormone. Thyroid gland says great, and it starts doing it. Both of these exert negative feedback, so they turn off. So you get it just right so you can maintain perfect. Okay, next, adrenal medulla. You're in the middle of being stressed out. I'm in the middle of an episode, a middle of a quiz. That's going to give me adrenaline and what's the anger one? Noradrenaline. Yeah, adrenaline or epinephrine and norepinephrine. Adrenaline is, okay, I'm fight or flight. And then anger, when people get mad when they're nervous, that's the noradrenaline. Okay, that right here, this is your protein hormone. It works quickly. It stands at the door and knocks and triggers a response inside. Your adrenal cortex out here, the outermost part of the adrenal gland, sustains stress. A year of living with somebody or a grandparent where they're not doing well and you're stressed out for a year. COVID, okay, for a couple of years. A semester of a really hard class that you're struggling in. Okay, that's long-term stress, and that's your adrenal cortex. Okay, look at your bio, buddy. See if they're okay. Did that answer your question on the adrenal gland? Okay. Next, we already talked about the pancreas. Remember the islets of Langerhans. So you have two hormones, antagonistic, contrary, right? You have insulin, which will lower blood sugar, and glucagon, which will raise it. Okay. These are easy. Anything that has to do with sex characteristics, it's going to be ovaries or testes, right? You know where those are. Testosterone, estrogen, and progesterone. The thymus gland, which sits above your heart, that becomes smaller as you age. Remember who matures there? T cells, and that's how they got their name. Thymus gland, T cells, cell-to-cell combat. Okay, we talked about the pineal gland, which is in your brain. Okay, and this pineal gland, just like you have your hypothalamus, it's not identified, but your hypothalamus is right here. And then this is supposed to be your pituitary gland in here. But your pineal gland is like your third eye. Remember, it secretes melatonin. And the longer you sleep, the higher the melatonin levels go up. And then if you see a bright light or the sun, then your melatonin goes down. Okay, then the others were things like our fat tissue secreting leptin. And when we eat, if we don't eat too quickly, if we eat slowly, it allows our body to give us feedback that we're full. That naturally happens if you eat slower. Okay, and that's from your fat tissue. Your kidneys secrete something called EPO. Do I have it on here? Oh, there it is. EPO, and this helps you make more red blood cells. Okay, and then prostaglandins are secreted by several different tissues, and they do like opposite of each other. Some places they enhance pain, some places they decrease pain, sometimes they cause more contraction, sometimes less, but they're called local chemical mediators. It's like influencing, just right around those neighboring tissues. The analogy I use for that is the nervous system. It's really close. It's like if your friend like punches you in the arm, right? It's very, very close. You're right next to him, right? You're punching him right in the arm. Then what I would say is prostaglandins, like you're at the movie theater with a bunch of friends and you're like, hey, can you pass the popcorn? And it gets passed around your friends. That's like prostaglandins. And then hormones are like if you stood up in the movie theater and you said, hey, person down in the front row, stop being so loud, or something. You yelled and everybody could hear you. That would be like hormones. Does that make sense? Did that help? It probably didn't. I'm sorry. I'm really sorry. Okay. Difference between hormones and pheromones. Hormones are within your body. Pheromones are like two different organisms signaling to each other. We talked a little bit about maybe not that females could drag other females onto their menstrual cycle. And we talked about those axillary secretions, and maybe we would be attracted to somebody who has different MHC factors as us. And then last but not least, we talked about tears. And what do tears do? It kind of makes me happy. What do they do? Yeah, lowers testosterone level. So you shouldn't make us cry. Okay. Don't forget your additional objectives listed on your calendar. You could use the embedded. I asked you a ton of embedded questions in the Pear Decks. Those would be good for you to use. Those are the kind of questions I put on the quiz. Okay. Look at those Pear Decks. All right. Good job. Good job. Good job.